Hi, everyone. Welcome to Six Figure Authors, the show that helps you take your writing career to the next level. I'm Andrea Pearson, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Lindsay Baroker.
And I'm Joe Lalo.
And this is kind of crazy. This is episode 52. We've been on the air for a whole year now, except we did release a few episodes early. So not a whole year, but 52 episodes represents 52 weeks. How does that feel, guys?
I feel like we actually started in October last year. Is that because we pre-recorded them? I
No,
don't
yeah.
remember.
I think our first episode came out in like September,
We had
like
bonus
towards the end.
episodes. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
It's just great. It's good times. I like milestones.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Go ahead. I guess we're done with the banter, the pre-show banter. So continue on.
Yeah, I was going to say, we actually started before I released Shadow Prophet because I was like, hey, fantasy authors, should we do a newsletter swap with me for my release? So, and that went smashingly. No sarcasm, right? Anyway, so we decided that we wanted to do another mistakes episode. We did one in episode 20. And like, I don't know, one thing that I've discovered as an author, it's nice to hear when successful authors screw up because it helps make them feel human. And so we want to do that. We wanted to sound human for you guys because we are. And hopefully something will be helpful and will help you not make the same mistakes. So we're going to go right into it. I hope that's okay with the two of you. And Joe, if you wanted to go ahead.
Sure. So I guess I should bring up, well, we're going to talk about the mistakes we've made in the last 5 years first. And because most of my mistakes last time we talked about this were piled up on my release. So I'm going to talk about Shards of Shadow, my urban fantasy release. I've spoken about things that went wrong with it in the past, but it's sort of the key mistake that I made. I'll have some more mistakes later, don't worry. But my Shards of Shadow release was not great, and it was not great for a number of reasons. It's urban fantasy, for those who didn't follow its development. Urban fantasy's got some pretty stiff competition, and that's sort of true of every genre, but very true of urban fantasy. There's a lot of like traditional pubs that are still doing a ton of urban fantasy, and you know, just in general, that means that it's going to be harder to market because the keywords and everything like that, the successful ads are slicing a lot thinner because a lot more of them are being run. So already it was going to be more difficult. It was my first release, my first series release to be Amazon exclusive. And I didn't take the time to build up my Amazon exclusivity chops. Like, I've done this podcast, obviously, and I spoke to a lot of people, and I had all the techniques in place, but I was still trying to do it as sort of a hybrid thing, because my assumption was most of my fans are accustomed to me being wide. And even though a great majority of those fans, well, I can't say great, but even though a lot of those fans buy my stuff on Amazon, most of them aren't Amazon exclusive. Like, they don't use KU necessarily to buy my stuff because it's usually not available there. So I tried to cater to the people who didn't use Amazon exclusively, and that made for a very weak release because, for example, I did a pre-release bundle with Story Bundle, which went reasonably well. I think I sold over 500 copies as part of that. But I can't assume that all 500 of those people would not have bought it any other way. Like, some of the people who would have bought it on Amazon bought it as part of the bundle anyway because they wanted it early. And that's, you know, day one sales that I didn't make. And so that's not great. Similarly, I believe this was a part of my Patreon. I think Patreon was running at that time, and that's only probably a dozen people who got it that way. But it's another, you know, it undercut that release too. And the other thing that I think was a pretty major mistake I made with this one is that I gambled way too much on it. Like, this is my first rapid release, so I wrote all of them stacked up, and I basically took 3 or 4 months straight of focusing entirely on the development of an entirely new series. And as a result, I sort of let everything else slide. There obviously weren't any releases in any of my other series, and I was busy doing research and getting ready the promotions that would be used to do the launch for the new series. So I wasn't keeping up promos on earlier stuff. So it caused a pretty big dip in just my overall author, you know, gravitas. My footprint got smaller, And then I released with a bad launch, and it just all sort of piled up to produce a really bad launch overall. And I really haven't financially, I haven't recovered from that yet. Like I have gotten some of my footing back, but it was a permanent hit. And I should say also, I had read an awful lot of urban fantasy, so I felt as though I understood what people were looking for in urban fantasy. But I made a classic mistake we've mentioned in other episodes, where I only knew what I look for in urban fantasy. I didn't bother going and checking what elements people expect to be part of urban fantasy, and thus I didn't hit all the tropes right on the nose. Obviously, that only hurts sell-through. It doesn't hurt the sales of the first book unless I did a really bad blurb and I mentioned all the things no one wants and all the things everyone wants. But generally speaking, like, I really hamstrung the chances for this series for a broad audience, because I didn't focus tightly upon the tropes in, again, a very well-defined and popular genre. And also, I overestimated how many of my fans would follow me over into this genre, because I have a lot of sci-fi fans, I have a lot of fantasy fans, but not necessarily everybody who reads sci-fi or fantasy is going to like urban fantasy. It's a very specific thing. So yeah, that was sort of, it was a collage of bad ideas that came together into that release.
Yeah, we'll just start right out talking about, we're not just going to start with the little things. Please, let's talk about the mistake that sunk my year. But no, I just wanted to say too that I think that's great, because, that's not great. Joe, that's great that you're sharing this, because, you know, we're all like, rapid release is great, guys. You should all do rapid release if you're a fast writer and you can do it. But it is a good point that if you're going to pause and take the time to write 3 or even 5 novels before you start publishing, because you want to put them out 1 month after the other, that yeah, you're not working on your other series during this time. Or, you know, even if you had completed your old stuff, there's going to be a gap before you have the new stuff out. And yeah, it's a gamble when you're going to a new genre too, that you don't have a readership in. I want to let Andrea chime in too, but I'm curious, if there's, looking back now, how would you have done it differently?
I definitely would have, like, structurally, the series would have been a little bit different. The series doesn't focus on a private investigator, which everything else about it would have been served by a PI, but instead it was a photographer, because there's this whole light and darkness thing I was trying to do. So trope-wise, I would have restructured it a little differently. I definitely would not have done the introductory bundle. I probably would have saved the bundle for when I eventually went wide after a year, as opposed to doing the bundle and basically shifting hundreds of day one sales over onto a non-ranking site. And other than that, I probably would have hedged my bets a little bit and made sure that I kept some promotional stuff going to the other series, as opposed to doing all or nothing on the new release.
So yeah, just a little note about the rapid release thing. Like, something I've recognized, I've discovered is, a lot of people are like, yes, we need rapid release. But if it's not what readers want, then it doesn't matter what you do. And that's not necessarily a reflection on what you did. But I like rapid released a whole bunch of short stories, and I did like one every 2 weeks for months, and it didn't really do anything, because my readers don't care about short stories. Anyway, there's a market for short stories, but it's not generally like in my market. So my question, actually, I was wondering, we've talked a lot about your launch and my launch. It's really funny that both of us, our last urban fantasy launches were like, bleh. What do you think you did right with this launch, for, so that listeners can learn from that?
Well, I definitely did my research on my covers. I think the covers are pretty spot on for the genre. I do think, even though again the story wasn't perfectly on tropes, I think that the structure of the story was pretty good. I think I put together a decent urban fantasy story. It just wasn't close enough to the market. And also, I think that I nailed the length. Like, I wrote these at a length that was sustainable for a further rapid release, if I had chosen to do so. And I guess another thing that I did right about this was, I knew to sort of bail out when I realized that this wasn't a winner. So there will eventually probably be a book 4 and a book 5, but I, created the year of 6 as a response to, okay, nobody likes this new thing. Let me do a couple of old things real quick.
I think that probably one of the biggest takeaway I took from this, and it makes a lot of sense in hindsight, is that not only did you probably lose like fans that could have gone and bought it on day one if they hadn't got it through the story bundle, you must now have people that are like, well, when are book 2 and 3 coming out that aren't in the Amazon ecosystem? So I don't know if you've got an email. I know I would have gotten upset email from people that wanted the rest of it. So
I did end up with at least 2 or 3 of those people coming over to the Patreon and asking very nicely if they could get a copy of the book. I was like, oh, okay, I could do that. It's disconnected from sales. It doesn't count as an Amazon sale.
no, and that's why what I've learned with my stuff after having done mistakes too is just to leave a series, launch the series in Kindle Unlimited if I'm going to do that, and do the whole series, and then later take it all out together. Because I think that if you just do one and then you take it out, and then a year later you do the next one and you want to put that in KU, you have to like bring the first one back in, or you have to just accept that you're not going to be able to promote it. It gets a little confusing. All right. So my first mistake that I'm going to share, it's actually more than 5 years old, but I don't think I've talked about it before. So you guys can place it anywhere in the timeline you like. But when I was writing my first series, this was The Emperor's Edge, and the novels were all well over 100,000 words. And I was still working at the day job then, so I wasn't writing as quickly. I was trying, my goal was to move from like 1,000 words a day to 3,000 words a day, but that was a transition that took a little while. And I decided, since, I was doing okay, I was still getting a novel out every 5 or 6 months, but I decided to start a series of novellas. So both because people had told me, your series is kind of steampunk. You should, write some actual steampunk. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll do that. And I'll try a series of novellas so that they'll be short, so I can get them out in between the books and they wouldn't take as long to write. That was my reasoning. And it wasn't a horrible idea. I wouldn't necessarily say, no, don't do that. Don't do a release in between the longer things. But the length is what made them kind of a tough sell. Also the fact that even though they were more embracing steampunk, they were kind of gadgety. The heroine in the first one makes a steam-powered dogless dog sled, and enters a race in the Yukon. It was a fun story. Wasn't really like traditional steampunk's kind of that Victorian England setting, or Europe anyway, and here I am in the Yukon doing whatever with dogless sleds. But the first one was about 17,000 words. The second one was 23,000 words, and I kind of realized I couldn't charge that much for them when my full novels of over 100,000 words were. I think they were $3.99 back then. I've since moved things up to $4.99. But I ended up selling the novellas for 99 cents, and I think one was $1.49, and maybe the third one was up to 27,000 words, so I charged $1.99. Eventually, and it took me a long time to finish the series of 5, because they weren't making very much money. It's like you're getting horrible royalties because of that pricing. The last 2 were like around 37 and 40,000 words, so I charged $2.99 for them. But looking back, I don't usually regret stories I've already written. I just move on and do something else. But looking back, it wasn't the smartest decision just because of that awkward length. And you certainly can charge $2.99 for whatever, 20,000 words, let's say. People do it all the time, but I always sort of keep word count in mind, and always wanting to give the reader a fair value. And if my novels were $7.99, then maybe a $2.99 20,000 word novella wouldn't be a big deal. But I was still very early in my career too, so I wasn't that confident of being able to sell things at higher prices. And I never wanted those reviews that are like, this was too short, total ripoff. So basically, they took time to write. It was another series I had going on at the same time. They weren't very big money makers. It was okay, but looking back, I probably would have just focused on the novels and maybe getting them out a month earlier instead of taking a month to do this other project on the side. So yourself, but I think that's it's just awkward to sell that stuff. I eventually bundled up the first 3, and it's like a $3.99 omnibus. It's okay, but I find that stuff doesn't sell as well as just complete novels, and that's why that's almost exclusively what I write now. Very rarely I'll do a novella, but most of the time, anything under 40,000 words is just going to be a free bonus for my newsletter subscribers. All right, I'll stop
That's
talking if you have thoughts.
that's a good way to go. Joe, do you have anything you want to add?
This was like before you did this, like had you ever tried to write like a series of novellas? Like you've mentioned several times on the show that you've found that your shorter stuff does not proportionately take less time to write. It tends to take proportionally more time to write the shorter stuff. Did you know that yet at this stage?
I knew very little at this stage, and I'm not sure that that was that much the case then. I think now I've gotten faster at the novels, and the short story novellas haven't sped up. I don't know. But no, I didn't know that too. I think for the time investment, it'd probably be better just to write novels, but then I would have been taking longer in between the installments in the series, and the whole idea was to have something to release in between the real releases or the major releases. So it's not like I had to do it once to figure out that it wasn't really the thing to do, but that's why now when people are like, I want to do serials or I want to publish really short things, I'm like, well, you can try it, but you'll probably find that you can just make more money overall if you just can write stories that are a little longer and that do feel like complete novels.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm at the point in my life where writing a whole novel is taking me like months. And so I'm like trying to decide where I want to go. But there are genres, and actually this is funny that you went this way with the end of your thoughts, that there are genres that do really well with shorter fiction. And I'm like, how do authors figure out what those genres are instead of inventing a genre that doesn't care for it? Because I'm like, historical Western romance, I have tons of author friends who are making quite a bit of money off of 20,000 word novellas, and their readers don't care that they're short. They don't get negative reviews about length, and I know that's not the only genre that does that. So how do you help authors who are like, nobody's doing it, I'm gonna start it, and help them recognize that maybe let other people be the the pavers of new trails or whatever? I don't know.
I'm not saying it's not going to work for anybody. For me, I've just found that I make more money when I write full novels than I do. And it, like I said, Joe pointed out, I've talked about before, I don't seem to write the short stories. It's not like I just can knock them out in a weekend. For some reason, like I just did a 14,001 novelette. I guess that's not a short story, for a bonus for my newsletter peeps. And peeps, did I say peeps? I'm so not, I don't think that's a trendy term. I derailed myself. But anyway, 14,000 words I ended up taking over a week by the time I was kind of letting myself relax because I'm waiting for my beta readers to send something back. But over a week to write it and edit it. So, and I've written whole novels in that time when I'm really focused, and I don't know, just rambling along. If it works in your genre, you can try it. But at the same time, I feel like whenever Mark Coker has done his roundups of smash words, like this is what's selling best, he posts the graphs. It's like always the novels over 100,000 words that are making the most money. So it's not that you can't do it, but you might actually make more if you wrote novels. But you have to decide how much time do you have? Like, can you not do 100,000 word novels? Then it's probably better to do a series of novellas. And if they work in your genre, awesome. If you have written longer stuff in the past, readers might kind of not enjoy shorter stuff if they are your dedicated readers and they expect longer stuff. That may be tougher. If you're newer, if you're going into a new pen name, that may be a time to try something short just to dabble and test the waters. Joe, obviously you should have done 20,000 word serial urban fantasy to get started.
Yeah, that would have been maybe.
I don't know. Andrea, do you want to go on to your first thing?
Yeah. And you, again, like you said something that I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking. Cause like when I first started writing, my books were about 80, 90,000 words long, and that was just one series. And then I transitioned to 50,000 word books, which I've done consistently since then. And in the beginning, my books didn't do super well because my readers wanted the longer ones, but they're now trained to expect 40 to 50,000 word novels. And I call it a novel because to me, it's a novel, like Dean Wesley Smith, he's like 40 to 50,000 word books are his style. And if that's what you're doing, then any variation from that is probably not going to do as well, anything that you're regularly doing. So people who do write short stories and that's all you do, you can, readers, there is a market out there who doesn't they prefer short stuff. Okay, so my first mistake and this is just something that's part of my personality, and it's something that I'm trying to deal with. I've done better with it over the last year or so, which is why it's under mistakes made in the last 5 years and not mistakes made in the last year. Basically biting off more than I can chew. So I have a lot of drive and ambition when it comes to books. I'm always working on something or other under that umbrella, but I allow myself to get excited and distracted by other business projects very easily. So for example, we work with a local elementary school every year on books and art projects. You know, the kids help us come up with the topic and the themes, and they help us come up with characters. And I've absolutely loved doing that. Working with the school in general has been a great experience, and I don't regret it. But I should have kept it simple rather than jumping to new, exciting ideas. So, for example, one year I said yes to helping with a writing and art contest. I should not have done that because I was already volunteering at the school, and finding time for everything I needed to do back then was very difficult. Another year, one of the teachers moved to a younger grade and asked me to start visiting the younger grades too. And again, I should not have done that. Visiting the older grades was already hard enough. And we ended up promising a personalized books for the kids before I'd done my research into it. And because I worked with CreateSpace, I ended up having over 100 separate print books in my backlist. They're archived, but I can't delete them. And that just drives me nuts. And it definitely didn't make back the time we put into it because of the hassle of uploading every single individual book. Honestly, I think I'd probably do it again with what I learned, and I'd make money out of it because there's a lot of money in personalized kids books if you have a foothold in a local school, you know. But the problem is not what I do on a general basis. And so I don't think I would make as much as if I were to just release another novel. And it's not what I'm passionate about. I want to be writing novels, not doing personalized kids book for a local elementary school. And so basically, pretty much every year we've worked with that school except one. I've said yes to an idea that really excited me, but that took a lot of time and didn't benefit us or the students enough for it to have been worth that time. And that's just, again, like I said, that's something I've been working on with my personality. I'm like, oh, that's such a fantastic idea. I'm going to do that. And then it just derails me. I don't leave books, writing books, but I do have side projects all the time that don't benefit my life as much as I thought they would in the beginning. All right, bash me, guys, bash me.
I was just going to say that I have the same shiny object tendencies, and I think it's just I've had to learn by doing it and having that realization also. I don't have a specific instance like that in mind, but I mean, even last week, like I told you, it took me much longer than usual to write that novelette. I know it's not a short story, but I had taken a day off after finishing the big sci-fi series, and I was like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was like on YouTube, I was like, okay, I'm going to take the time to finally learn what the heck Bitcoin and blockchain and all that stuff is all about. So I went on this rabbit hole, and I was interesting. I'm like learning stuff, and like I now have clues, but it ended up being like a whole week of just, you know, I was like listening to YouTube videos and kind of fascinated. Like, do I need to be buying Bitcoin? No, I should have bought Bitcoin 5 years ago. You know, and I was like, I'm almost on this whole thing. Like, maybe I should have an account with this Coinbase. And I'm like, wait, maybe I should write my story and do the things that I already know make money instead of like, oh, should I do this? And then I've been on this like, oh, should I start a YouTube channel? And Joe and Andrea know last night, I was like, dude, guys, peeps, I just ran across this guy's video. He does an investment channel and he's making like $250,000 a month from YouTube ads. I need to start a YouTube channel. And so no, I mean, I may do that for my author stuff someday. I'm pretty sure dragons don't get the high paying ads, things about dragons. But so I just want to say, I totally understand. I'm always like excited about like business opportunities, even though I have a business, and it would be stupid to go off and pursue other things. But for myself, what I found, I did the same thing with stories. You know, writers, we're always like, oh, I want to write this next series, even though I have 4 books left in this other one. So I write it down, take all the notes I need to. Sometimes it's outlining a whole book. And then if I'm still excited about it in like 3 months, then I know, okay, that's something I should go ahead and do. But if it's like, oh yeah, I don't care about Bitcoin anymore, whatever, I'm not going to go start lending people money on crypto.com or BlockFi or whatever it was. Then that time gives me time to realize, okay, no, that was just a passing fancy. I don't need to invest that time in it. So I'm not always super wise, but I've gotten better, probably the same as Andrea.
That's a really good point, because if you're really excited about something, and if it's, I don't know, like that whole, if I don't do it now, the opportunity is going to be forever gone. The problem is by the time you have the idea and you implement it, then the opportunity is probably already going to be gone. And so if it's still not something that's viable 2 or 3 months later, then it's not worth your time. That's something I'm going to need to tell myself. I need to write that on my mirror.
And also, just on the subject of biting things, more than you can chew. There's a couple of different ways you can end up overburdened, and sometimes it can be that you're the kind of person who can only focus on one thing, and you just start, you get Pat Rat syndrome, where there's 6 things you keep on cycling between them and don't make any process. But other times you can be a really efficient worker, and you can have, things running in parallel, and you're getting them all done, but you find that you've completely consumed all of your time, and you just set yourself up for burnout. Like, you can be a tremendously productive person who's bitten off more than they can chew and not realize it until you have a 2-month, crash because of it. So there's a lot of different ways that this can happen.
You just described my life in two different ways, the pack rat and the efficient. I'm like, I've been lamenting to like my editor and my husband. I'm like, I've got so many really awesome things going on right now, and I can't juggle between all of them. So I'm like just trying to figure out what I need to let go of, like my YouTube channel, for my gaming YouTube channel, which, by the way, I'm not going to tell people what it is, because
Are
I'm
you
trying
making
to keep my
250? Tell us, are you making 250,000 a month on it? Because we need to know if you are.
I am certainly not. I haven't reached 1,000 subscribers yet. I've gone up by like 300 subscribers in the last 2 weeks, though, because the gaming company that I do my channel for recognize me as an official content creator for their game. And so I'm one of their reps now. And so that's been really, really exciting. And I've been getting all these really awesome opportunities over there, but I'm like, I don't want to drop that, because I do love it, but it was something to help me through my burnout. Cause I was like, I needed a hobby. I didn't have a hobby. And so now I'm like at the point now, I'm like, I've got responsibilities there now too. What is going on with my life? I need to just figure out how to, tone things down without dropping balls. But balls end up getting dropped because you take on too much, and that's the problem I've had. But I didn't include my gaming channel in my list of mistakes I've made, because it has been a really good experience for me. And as my editor told me on the phone the other day, when I was like, what do I do? She's like, these are they're like, your Midnight Chronicles series would be huge with this audience. They would love it. So I haven't even told them what my pen name is. I haven't told them what books I've written. And she's like, you need to start pimping your books to them, that you've got this captive audience and you could actually get book sales from them. And I'm like, it's true, but that's not the purpose of that channel. So I have to find a way to, I don't think they'd mind a mention here and there of my books, maybe a giveaway or something like that. So if I can find a way to help to monetize it without it being sleazy monetization, being like, hey, by the way, I created this channel just to get you guys to buy my books. It's a lot of work for that. But anyway, so I just need to figure it out.
All right. I guess it's my turn now. We're going to talk about the children's book debacle. This is like, every now and then you make a mistake that you end up thinking about 2 nights a week, and this is one of those for me. When I started making money and I started to have the resources to do so, I sort of made a list of the different types of projects I'd like to make. And one of the things on there was a children's book. I didn't have any delusions about making tons of money on the children's book, just a fully illustrated, picture book for kids. In fact, I was going to tie them to existing series just because I just wanted to play with those characters in a different medium. But I still wanted to do it. And I've worked on 2 of them now. And if you've never tried to do this sort of thing, a children's book is one of the more expensive things you can do as an indie author. If you're doing fully illustrated, it's right up there with audiobook in terms of how much money you're going to spend on it, depending on how much, the nature of your illustrator. I like art, though, and I just wanted to try the fully illustrated book. I did my research, and I picked some of the artists I'd worked with before. I know that they did good work and that we'd worked well together. And I invested my money, and I got started. One of the books is nearly done. There's a few more, there's a couple more pages need to be inked, and then a couple more pages need to be colored, and then it's finished. That one even has some small interest in a potential release with a print in, like a children's book imprint already. Like, the illustrator put me in touch with someone who might have the capacity to do that. So there's legs on that one. The other one, very unlikely it will see the light of day at this point. I'm going to avoid giving out the personal information about the artist, because I don't think that does anybody any good. So I was going to sort of do this short, vague version. A couple years ago, we got this project started and did some preliminary work. And, I checked all the boxes. We had a statement of work, and we had a contract, and things started off very well. I have the original email thread where they were doing daily updates on what I was getting done. As time progressed, though, the contact between us became increasingly rare, and I found out that the artist was actually having some personal problems that, again, I'm not going to go into, but they were valid reason to be distracted. And so I was like, oh, take your time, take your space. It's okay. There's no deadline on this. And then it continued to happen. The contact got less and less, and the artist stopped taking other commissions. Basically, the artist started to sort of vanish from the internet. And months turned into years. We're about 4 years into this project now, and about a year since I've heard any firm updates from this person. This person has not tweeted in a year. Like, I don't know where they are. So it's, again, a pricey endeavor. We're talking this person, I only paid for work done. Like, I saw the thumbnails of the work that was done. So I know that this person wasn't just taking my money and running away. But I don't get them until they're done, and none of them got finished. And even if they did get finished, I can't use them until the whole book is done. So any money I sunk into this, and we're talking thousands of dollars, can't be spent anyplace else. And again, now I have a contract. I could get lawyers involved, but we're not talking enough $1,000 for that to be financially viable. Like, I will just basically take the money that I gave to this person and give it to a lawyer, and also just make everyone's life uncomfortable for years. So I'm not that person, so that's not going to happen. There is still the possibility that this person, will send me an email one day and be like, hey, listen, I'm finally financially stable. I think I can finally take this project back on, or here's your money. I'm sorry for doing this, but that's certainly not going to happen during the pandemic. So generally speaking, this was a gigantic comedy of errors, not unlike the book release I talked about earlier. When I make mistakes, I make clusters of mistakes. And really, the mistake, a lot of this wasn't in my control, but a lot of it was in my control. I should have been much more proactive about monitoring the status of the project. And as it became clear the project was unlikely to progress, I should have gotten together with this person and talked about how to transition from them to someone else, or to just sort of dissolve the project in a more amicable way. And I didn't do any of that, and now here we are.
Yeah, I married an illustrator. That's my only recommendation, is to marry an illustrator. But then the problem is if they can't finish it, then it can get even sticky for a marriage relationship. But honestly, like last year at the business masterclass, the big authors there, like Kevin J. Anderson and Dean Wesley Smith, and I don't remember who else. Maybe David Farland got involved. I can't remember who all, but all of them talked about pursuing legal things, whether to sue somebody or not. And every single one of them said it is not worth it, because the time, it saps so much of your attention and so much of your emotions and your energy. I have a friend who sued somebody for, breaking the law, basically. And she won ultimately, but it took like 4 years of her life. And she was miserable during all that. And I'm like, she won, but was it worth it? In my opinion, it's not. And it's that feeling that, if I could just get my money back, if I could just have things made right, sometimes it's just not worth it.
I've also had the experience of like amazing artists. I have one guy did like 3 covers for me, and they were beautiful. Like, I love illustrations that are very realistic, and he did a great job, and disappeared off the face of the planet, stopped updating his website, everything, did not respond to emails. So it's tough. I think at this point, if I was going to do some kind of project, because it's always fun, I understand why you were like excited about it. I've thought, wow, it'd be really cool to do like a graphic novel with one of my series. I would like want to hire an artist for, like on salary, and have them doing nothing but my own thing for however long. I think that's the only way I would go forward with something like that at this point. It's super tough. The people who are really good and really reliable are really booked solid, because I think they're such a rare breed in the industry. But yeah, I guess I will jump into my next one. So this is a little more with my pen name stuff than with my regular stuff, but I've had the experience where I've caught myself writing things where, I've talked about before, I'm not a write to market person. I never really like what's popular and trendy, unfortunately. Like how great would it be to actually want to write about the things that are popular? But I've you see what's selling, and I've caught myself sort of like nudging my thing, taking a me idea and nudging it in that direction to try to like, well, maybe these will be a little easier to sell to that audience that likes all the popular things. And, honestly, those have never done as well as when I just write the things that are completely and totally me, and I'm not worrying about the market, or, if I set this on Earth instead of some made up planet, will it sell better? Will it attract more people? And some of my fan favorite stories are the ones that, they have to have some commercial appeal like we've talked about, but they also tend to be, with me, different than what's out there. I've talked about the one I did with the autistic heroine, the mom pilot searching for her kid. The most recent sci-fi series, the hero is a Jewish seizure-prone robotics professor, which is I don't know about my sci-fi, it really tends to want to do the non-standard characters, which is pretty far from the Han Solo type of hero that's, more popular in the genre. And they're very me kind of quirky characters though, and I get really, sometimes it's hard to like take something like that and fit it into the space opera trope and have a blurb that really sells. And if you don't have a blurb that's kind of to the market, it's a little harder to advertise it too, because people click on the, oh, cool spaceship, and then they start reading like, what, geeky robotics professor, that's not what I want to read about. But I've got such nice emails from readers with these stories when I give, especially if they connect with that reader because they are that themselves, and they've really struggled to find characters like that out there. So I have to remind myself, I am a weirdo, and I'm probably writing stories for the other weirdos out there, and it's really what I do best. And the more I try to get closer to the popular trendy stuff, the less I succeed and the less I make those fans happy. The good thing is, and I know this, and for some reason it still can be hard not to try to go, oh, this would be more commercial if it was like this. The good thing is when you write sort of that quirky stuff for quirky people, that they tend to be really loyal readers when you get them, if you satisfy them. And I don't know, I feel like people that are writing maybe just, I don't want to say formulaic, that's not what necessarily writing to market is, but the more mainstream you are, maybe the more, I don't want to say interchangeable either. I don't want to be rude to people that write to market. There's nothing wrong with that, but there is at least a benefit of being weird and writing stuff that is not as, mainstream, I'm going to say. So you can make a career, and I have to remind myself that you do perfectly well writing just about characters that are like you, and in situations that are not the typical for your genre, it can still work. All right, I'm done rambling. If you guys have any thoughts on that.
Joe, you can go first if you like to.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think that there's a thing about being genuine. And that's not to say, again, that you are necessarily being disingenuous when you write something to market. But when something is genuinely you, you're going to get a smaller audience unless you are like the platonic ideal of a certain genre. But the people that you do connect with, you're going to connect with so much, better. We talk a little bit about, like, we had an episode recently, we talked a little bit of representation and how like certain types of people don't get written very often. And you definitely get the email. Like, I don't get letters from people who are like, oh, this was exactly like this, this was exactly like Star Wars. I don't get letters from people, emails from people saying, oh, I love how similar it was to this thing that I also really like. It's always people who are like, this is the only book I can remember. Like my sci-fi series is not mainstream sci-fi, really. There's no aliens. It's listed as a space opera, but it really doesn't have that scope until like the 4th or 5th book. But apparently there's a book called The Stainless Steel Rat, which I am constantly compared to. And I'd never heard of it. I didn't read it. I have read it since. It's good. It is similar to what I write. But just like, I found that author's entire audience that found my books were like, oh, another one. So like you end up with these people, and they're going to tell all their friends, like, hey, you like that book too, right? Well, listen, I got another series for you. So I think you're a lot more likely to get word of mouth on the unique books, because We've talked about how you have to give people what they expect in order to actually sell. But when you do stand out, it at least gets you talked about a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And honestly, I don't know, like, I think that something that we are trying to tell our listeners is that writing to market isn't bad. That's not what we're saying. If you can write to market, if you are passionate about what is being written to market, and if that makes you excited, then you're really lucky, honestly, because those are the authors who tend to, do really, really well without as much work as what I do, right? But what we're saying is write what excites you and what you're passionate about, and you'll do better in the long run. The chances of burning out when you're writing what you're enjoying are a lot lower than writing something just because it's going to be successful. I mean, there's that happy, where the circles overlap and you write what you love while trying to get it as much as possible to what readers want. And honestly, there's going to be genres where you're going to be closer to what readers expect than other genres. And so part of the challenge is figuring out what that is.
I
And
will add that before you go, if you are going to write to market, I would really study the market and make sure you nail it instead of trying to blend. Like, here's my kind of quirky idea. Let me see if I can bring in some of the elements, and because then you're not going to make anybody happy. I mean, so just do one or the other and go with it. Okay, go ahead, Andrea. Sorry.
you're fine. Okay, so I've got for my last mistake I've made in the last few years. The first one is just something brief. And I've mentioned this before, and it's not huge. It is huge for me because of my situation, but not getting or trusting an assistant sooner. My first burnout that happened after my second kid was born was what really took a huge chunk out of my success. I was already working with my assistant, but I hadn't yet started handing off big things to her. And it took me months to be able to trust her. And my recommendation is if you're super busy, if you've got a really insane personal life, then see if you can find something while you're still functioning, someone who can help you take off some of the admin stuff that does drag you down. And I mean, the stuff that only you can do, that no, the stuff that other people can help you with. Because if I had done that earlier, if I'd taken the advantage of Adriel, honestly, earlier, then my burnout wouldn't have been as bad, and it wouldn't have slowed down my royalties as much as it did. And anyway, that's just a little thing for those of you who are, kind of in a situation like mine. But honestly, something, and we talked about this last week, and I didn't realize this until while I was thinking about our episode that we recorded last week, but I should not have created a Patreon account. And one of the biggest issues is spreading myself too thin, like I said. But it's really, really hard. And I know listeners are going to relate with this. It's really hard hearing other people have a lot of success or be super successful at something and then not being able to do it yourself. But just because others are successful does not mean we should or need to pursue it. And so it was like really exciting to hear about authors who had, Patreon accounts that were getting them $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month or whatever. But that does not mean it is something that I should have been doing. And so the best way to make money as an author is by releasing books. And if you're struggling to find time to do that, then put all of your extra time into writing books, not embarking on other endeavors, unless they're what you really want to be doing with your time. And unless writing and releasing new stuff isn't what's does that extra endeavor does not depend on you writing and releasing new stuff. So because for Patreon as an author, success usually is dependent on writing new stuff. And I was already struggling with keeping up with a release schedule. And so starting a Patreon account was a bad choice on my behalf. And I actually went and opened it up today just to see where I was, where I'm at. And I'm down to like 19 Patreon supporters at $75 per creation release. And honestly, guys, it's just not worth it. And I spent a lot of time beefing that up and writing stuff that was just for Patreon that doesn't sell well on its own. And yeah, that's just something I should not have done. So maybe those of you who this is like you're high after listening to our Patreon episode last week, now here comes reality. Don't do it if you have a crazy life.
Well, or do it like Joe's doing it. He's just putting stuff out and then he's going to publish it anyway. And me too. And you have to make that mistake sometimes before you learn from it. Because I was actually lucky that I did a Kickstarter pretty early on before I had a bigger fan base that would have been like, oh my gosh, like it was hard enough already, like signing paperbacks and, having to just do all the extra stuff with the shipping and personalizing everything. But if it had some super successful one, that was like a $5,000 Kickstarter, then it would have been like way worse. But that experience is what taught me now not to take on anything that's going to involve having to write extra fiction. Even now, like I do the bonus stories and stuff, I almost always gripe about them, but I'm like, well, it's part of the marketing. They get on my newsletter to get the bonus stories, so it's worth doing. But almost every time I'm like, why did I promise them a bonus story? I'd rather just get on to the next thing. So just realize if you want to do it after we talked about it, maybe design it in a way that anything you do on the Patreon is going to be something you're going to publish anyway. So you're essentially getting paid twice for the same amount of work. That'd be the way I try to put it together. But yeah, I think we all have to have that experience at least once before we realize, okay, I start to resent it when I take on extra things that take me away from the thing that actually has the most potential to bring in money.
And that's a really good point, because I intended for my Patreon to be something that I did already, but it grew so slowly in the beginning that I was like, you know what, I need to start writing Patreon exclusive stories. And I think that just being patient, again, if I'd just been patient and recognized that I can build my Patreon audience slowly, like molasses, across a few years rather than writing stuff new for it. Because you're right, Joe. I mean, that's what you do, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, I have never really actively built the Patreon. It's always been just sort of a side thing to justify, as I talked about in the past one, it's sort of a smaller side thing to have a couple of utilities, but otherwise sort of self-maintain. And I guess I'll say on the subject of you mentioned assistants, personal assistants. We are indie authors, and most of the people listening to this show are probably indie authors, and you are accustomed to doing all of the work yourself. And it's important. It's absolutely important to realize the things that are better off delegated. Like even if you're not at the point where you feel you can afford or justify getting an actual like a full-time assistant or even a part-time assistant, there are certain things you can get freelanced for very affordably. If you are not good at making paperbacks, if you're not good at formatting paperbacks, and you don't have vellum or like that, you can very affordably find somebody who'll turn a manuscript into a paperback for you. If you're not good at like just so many little small parts of the author process that you could easily hand off to a vendor, and that's not it's a small step, and the amount of time you save for that investment can be enormous.
One small step for man, one giant leap for no. But yeah, Fiverr, for example, there's people on Fiverr who will format print books for $15 and they look good. So like Joe said, sometimes it takes a little bit of work to find those people, but once you do, they're going to be around for a while, and it'll save you so much time and so much stress, and you don't have to do it all. Like you don't have to, honestly. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about mistakes that we've made in the last year, just so that, especially, hounding in, pounding in, hammering in the fact that we still make current mistakes. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, this is a problem that I'm sort of experiencing now, just minutes ago. Misplaced focus has been a problem for me this year. It's pretty clear if you listen to any of the episodes that being an indie author is an entire job, and writing is often not even the biggest part of that job. So you end up needing a marketing plan. You need to keep your audience engaged. You need to learn about current trends and research markets. Your plate is always full, but if you're not writing, you don't have a product to sell, and that's a problem. So I fell into a bad pattern in the earlier parts of this year, where I was really dragging my feet on the writing part of writing. I was digging myself into research and doing A/B testing on a bunch of different advertising platforms, and I was like, here's what works for me here, move on to the next one, here's what works for me here, and I was focusing very intently on a series of small tasks that were all important on their own, and then sort of setting them aside, moving on to the next one. And I was really starting to miss my quotas on writing. Like my writing was really starting to fall behind. So I decided in the last few months I was going to try to turn that around, and come hell or high water, I was going to get my words written. And I have been successful for sure. I've been, my quota is only 3,000 words, which I say only. A lot of people are saying, I wish I could hit 3,000 words a day. And others are saying, how the heck do you have a career only writing 3,000 words a day? So it takes all kinds. But my quota is 3,000 words. And I have, like, on a day that I have decided I am writing, I haven't missed my quota in a little over a month. And prior to that, I hadn't missed my quota, more than 2 or 3 times in the preceding month. I've been doing very well in terms of keeping to my quota. However, it has been to the detriment of literally everything else I need to do. Like, I have been like, nope, sorry, my words aren't done yet. I'm not going to work on that advertising thing yet. Nope, sorry, my words aren't done yet. I'm not going to do that pre-order setup yet. And it has taken its toll. None of it's irreversible. All of it is going to, can be solved. But it's one of those things where I felt like I was doing the right thing. This is what I guess what I got to do. I got to get the book written. And it turns out there's 2 problems, because when you become so hyper focused, you end up with an unbalanced schedule and you feel the pain. But also, and this is very important, if you don't take your own mental health into consideration when you're putting together your schedule or making the requirements on yourself, it's going to be a bad time. I know from my college years that if I let things get too far out of my control and I start to feel overwhelmed, I hit a wall. And it hasn't happened, but it's sort of how it all started. When I started to lose track and lose my words, it's because I was feeling overwhelmed. And I tried to remedy that by focusing. But when you focus and fall behind, then you'll just be overwhelmed again in a few months. So it's a problem that I'm going to have to tackle basically. And I was talking about productivity apps earlier before we started recording. I'm going to have to basically time slice myself a little bit better, where either I set up admin days or admin hours, or otherwise just make sure I'm getting elements of all of my checklists written and done at the same time, even if that means decreasing my quota, or even if that means just sort of spreading my week out to have a certain number of days on and off.
That's funny. It's like you're looking forward to the weekend because you're going to get so much done. But when the weekend comes, you're like, breathing is fun.
Absolutely.
Okay, Lindsay, did you want to go first?
Well, I would say I'm also the hyper-focus type. I actually, it's good that I write quickly, because I also tend to, when I'm buried in a project, I'm like, email gets left beside. I only answer the emails that are like, I have to, because I'm like, here's my cover designer or an editor, or it's just urgent, and then I'm like, oh, I'll catch up on the other ones later. And unfortunately, this happens to be the case where I often, if it's been a couple weeks, I just don't get that far back in the inbox. And I need to put a big note on my contact form that's like, hey, if you don't hear from me in a couple weeks, try again. Because sometimes I answer right away. It just depends. If I'm on a project, I tend to put everything else aside. And honestly, that's when I'm happiest. It's just being in my little writing cave, completely ignoring all the other stuff. But then I do take admin days, usually a couple of days in between projects, and I'll try to catch up on the email as much as I can, do the things like setting up pre-orders, writing blurbs. As a series writer, I really only need to focus a lot on advertising and that stuff around the launch of a book 1. Subsequent books in the series, I'm just like, hey, here it is, to the newsletter subscribers. Of course, I've set things up to always have newsletter subscribers be coming in, to get the bonus stuff I was talking about before. So that's, as long as the books are selling, that stuff, the newsletter subscribers accumulate, and I'd have somebody to announce the new releases to. So it is sort of a cycle, or I don't know what you'd call it, a factory almost, but yeah, it's I think we all struggle with that. I know I have a hard time being like, I know some people like write in the morning for 2 hours and then do their admin stuff and ads and everything in the afternoon. I'm like, I don't want to do that stuff. You get 2 days between projects, and I'm going to do all I can then, and then go back to what I really like doing, which for me, and it's going to differ for people what the thing is that they really like, because I think some people honestly enjoy making spreadsheets and working on the advertising stuff more than writing the stories. They like having written the stories, which I think a lot of us also have that feeling sometimes. But yeah, it's something I think we all struggle with, is finding the time. Even if you do have an assistant, usually I think most people right now are still kind of running their own ads. Even if they've tried to hand it off, they've realized I have to pay that person a lot of money, and it's such a thin margin on ads that it can be tough to make that work out.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, I don't remember who said it, so it's not that much of a favorite quote apparently, but he said that in order to be successful, you need, like, basically you're never going to find a good balance between everything. Like, success usually means pushing really hard and neglecting other areas of your life. And so I don't know, like, getting those words written is really, really important. But like what Joe said, if it comes at the expense of advertising, sometimes you do have to take a break from writing to make sure your sales are doing. So when you do release a book, it does something. And I mean, it's been hard for me lately to get even little things done because, kids and stuff. And plus with the health things, I'm a lot more focused now. Now that I've kind of settled into, my tests have mostly been done and I'm just waiting for my follow-up appointment in a couple of weeks. And so I'm more settled in before hearing what the doctor has to say. But it's difficult, and it's nice to know that both of you guys, you do struggle with that. Cause I mean, especially I think our listeners will appreciate hearing that the powerhouse right turner person named Lindsay does have moments where she's like, who's shiny? Or, having to take admin breaks and getting stuff done, because honestly, getting those ads going or getting that wheelhouse going, like Lindsay was saying, where people are going into your subscriber list, your newsletter list, that is going to keep your books doing well. And so if taking a day or two to get that sort of thing set up so it's evergreen and going constantly, I think it's worth it to take time off of writing just to do that. The problem I find is I'm always finding something that's worth taking time off writing to get done. And so I have to draw a line somewhere, because if I'm not producing a book, then I'm not as happy. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling.
I do think it's good if you can set up the evergreen things that kind of constantly, that's why I like having some of the free book ones out there. Is like people keep downloading those even when I'm not advertising them. They're just out there looking for free stuff, especially right now. And yeah, the conversions are not great, but some amount of those people do go on to buy their others just in the series. And that's the easiest, least time consuming thing I can do. I know a lot of authors are like, I'm not giving anything away for free. I'm like, well, by me having that book one for free out there, and maybe every now and then I take 10 minutes and get a free Booksy sponsorship, that means I don't have to sit over here and spend all this time fiddling with ads and doing other things. So and the bigger your catalog gets, the more books you've already written, they're already paid for, they've already earned out. So it's less of a thing to make some of them free. And that's not the only thing I do, but it's a lot of them. I'm always willing to give away free stuff. I was just, I mentioned on Twitter that I was like looking at the people who I have a newsletter that I paid the premium to have their like newsletter, subscription newsletter, I guess you would call it, or I support them on Patreon, and every single one of those people that I support and pay that extra money for, like way more than you would pay for a book. It's because they have given out so much amazing free content that I'm just like, I'm a super fan. Of course, I'm going to give you $10 a month for, extra access to more of your stuff, even if it's almost the same stuff they put out for free. I'm just like, but I don't mind. I want to support them. They've made me a fan. So that was a little off the topic. Do you guys have any more thoughts on the topic that was becoming hyper-focused on balancing your schedule?
No more comments, Joe? No rebuttals or rebuttals?
No, I always agree with the advice I'm getting because I typically assume people are smarter than I am.
I think we've just all been there at this point. We've all been doing it long enough to, we all have the same problems. So if you guys listening have these problems too, you're not alone. Okay, this will be the last one for me. A mistake I've made this past year, and I've talked about this before a little bit, but I spent way more than necessary on my Death Before Dragons covers. Like Joe, I was going into urban fantasy for the first time. I was like, I'm just going to throw as much money as I can at this. Well, more than typical for a launch to try to make them awesome. I think they ended up being over $2,000 by the time you factor in the paperbacks too. And usually I'm more around maybe 800, I think, for my illustrated sci-fi books. And then I have a lot of stuff that was just Photoshop manipulation covers where you just paid, maybe you had to pay 20 extra bucks for the models, and then maybe 200, 300 from the cover designer. And there's really no reason I couldn't have done that for this urban fantasy series. My reasoning was I wanted to give myself a good shot, and I also wanted to not use the same stock models that everybody uses, even though I've had perfectly fine success. I've talked about my Dragon Blood series before, which is like the cheapest covers, just because cover prices have gone up too. And they're not even that to market because it was early on, and who knew what the market was for steampunk / high fantasy? I don't know. So if you have the money, that doesn't necessarily mean you should spend it. It's tempting once you start making more. You're like, oh, just spend money on whatever. But actually, having that sort of lean startup thing in mind, just always doing it for, like I try to make sure that everything pays for itself. I don't, like the audiobooks, I'm make sure that I'm like, okay, did that actually end up paying for itself? It's like, okay, I've at least breaking even on that. Even, so I'm not taking money from things that do well to fund things that don't do well. And, it's turned out fine. Those have all earned out since then in the last 6 months. I also spent a lot on advertising though on the first month or two, because like I said, I was like, I want to make this stick. I want to do it as well as I can. And I try to get a whole bunch of new urban fantasy fans. And I had done book 1 at 99 cents and left it there for a couple months and was like, I'm going to bid whatever I need to bid on ads to get in that top spot. And, it took longer to earn out than it should have, because I sunk a lot into the launch by my standards. And, now I just published book 6 today. So it's about 6 months since the series launched. And I bumped book 1 up to $2.99, and I went in and lowered the cost of my bid on the Amazon ads. I've still got money more, about $3,000 a month going to that book 1, which is more than I've spent in the past, but the book's making about $5,000 a month. And I don't pay for anything now that the covers are paid for the rest of the series. So I'm fine paying with that. It's actually the first time with Amazon ads I've had that experience where I can make book 1 make more than I spend on the ads. So I'm letting them run. In the past, I've just kind of turned everything off, or almost always off, because like I said, when you're writing something that's really not quite as much the market, it's a little tougher to make the ads do well. And you get into this situation where you have to calculate, well, am I making enough on the sell through? It's obviously easier if you can just make more on book 1 than you're spending on advertising. And this one is, it's not to market, but it's in the ballpark of, I was careful not to go too far out there with this series. So anyway, that's a long rambling way of saying I really did not need to spend that much money on the covers. I let my ego get in the way to some extent. Like some of it was like, I want to give myself a good shot. And someone was like, you know what, I have this podcast. People are going to be watching my launch. So I want to have these cool covers, and I want to not suck and not have a horrible sales ranking in this new genre I've never written in before. So there you go. Ego is always something to worry about, even if you've got everything else figured out, which I don't necessarily have everything else figured out. But anyway, any thoughts before we move on?
I think that, like, especially like, oh, I paid too much for covers or something like that. I think one of the biggest things you learn over time, if you're running your own business in any way, shape, or form, but certainly when you're an indie author, is you start to recognize how much is enough. Like you start to understand what value you're going to be getting out of something. And I collaborated on a book which might still come out, but certainly not with my name on it anymore. A long time ago, and the author I collaborated with was absolutely certain that we needed to have a cover done by somebody who charged $5,000 per cover. And I was like, I don't know that anyone's going to buy this cover because of who made the cover. And the quality of art is exceptional, but I have a guy who does art that's like that for $700, not $5,000. But he was absolutely certain that, like, no, it's just gold standard. We're going to do the absolute best. And I think it's a really important thing that you can learn, that, like, no, good enough is good enough. And no need to go overboard if you can get where you need to go with a certain amount of money.
Yeah, and I don't know, like book covers, getting something that meets expectations, even if it is a familiar model, is important. And as authors, we're like, but so and so many other people also use that model. That's something that I ran into too. But I'm like, we're tempted to, do something that breaks the mold. And sometimes, even if it is the same model, it's more important to just, I mean, I'm going to actually talk about book covers here and my next mistake. So I'm not going to go much more in depth into that. But ego, honestly, like I've mentioned, worrying about what our listeners would think if I put a pause on writing. So, I mean, what the heck, I don't want to stop writing because it makes me happy. That was what my ultimate decision was. But why did why did listeners factor in on that? It's just part of having a podcast, And also having my Midnight Chronicles fell was hard on my ego, and admitting it fell was even harder. It's tempting to sugarcoat things and make things sound better than they are, especially when you have people who do listen. But I don't know, Lindsay, like you've come on top. I'm still waiting for my series to come on top so that it's not, it doesn't turn out to be a waste of money for me.
Well, we were going to rewrite the blurbs, right? We talked about that a couple times ago. Maybe give it, yeah, that's a nice thing, at least about writing. It's not like you can't later go back and like relaunch a series, or if you become more successful later, you can always channel your new readers into the old series. Like, I mean, more successful in the way of like, if your next series is a hit, you can throw it in the back of, by the way, while you're waiting for book 4, I have this other series that you've probably never heard of before, but you should go check it out. So as long as you're getting stuff out and it's good, the stories are good, you don't have to give up just because maybe the launch didn't go as well as you wanted. Like actually this series, I was kind of down on it after the launch because it didn't stick, you guys, and it didn't stay in the top 10 for all of urban fantasy for months like I wanted it to. But now, I mean, the last time I checked today, like obviously I'm spending money on it for ads, but I've done that before and not had any results. But the first one's around 2,000 in the store, and it's 6 months later. And like I said, I'm spending money on the ads, but like I've always been willing to spend money on the ads if they convert. They don't. You always, the book ones are just not maybe quite. I always feel like I have to get people to try them, and then they get into my stuff. But despite trying to do the best blurbs and the best covers I can, that is the challenge when you're not as quite as much to the market. We had KM Shea. We did that Ladies Who Launch episode. People should check that out if they haven't. And I think she just did stock art covers, and she killed it. Her stuff totally stuck. She had the vampire, paranormal romance kind of thing, urban fantasy at the same time that really seemed to be what the readers wanted. And so that's always awesome if that happens. And if it doesn't mean that you can't still, it's still like the series is doing well this summer. I have no complaints. So hopefully you'll have that experience too, or you can relaunch it and give it another try. Sometimes just letting something lay fallow for a while and going back to it with fresh eyes too, it can help for structuring a relaunch.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about being an indie author. Like, it's not the end of the world for us. If we were traditionally published, that series would have sunk my name, and I would have had to start a different pen name if I wanted to move forward. And I'm almost done rewriting that description. It's like 2 weeks later, and I still haven't finished it. Do you go ahead, Joe? Did you want to add into that?
No, I think I covered my point.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I've talked about my last launch a lot, but there is one aspect of it that I haven't really mentioned. So when I was struggling with book covers, I reached out to 5 cover designers because I did my own book covers like 4 or 5 times, and for that series, and hated them all after loving them for like 1 or 2 days. And I reached out to 5 cover designers. I was under a huge time crunch. The series had already launched. I'd already put a lot of money into it. It wasn't going well. And I was like, I know it's the book covers. I need to get these fixed. And I had my absolute all-time favorite of them all. He was a good price. He was talented. I had friends who recommended him. But instead I picked the cover designer who responded first. I was worried that my favorite wouldn't get back to me and actually 3 of them never did ever respond to me. But if I'd taken a step back and breathed and waited 8 hours before answering the first cover designer's email, I would have saved $1,200. I ended up having that favorite cover designer because I was like, okay, I don't want to lose the opportunity of working with him. So I had him work on other book covers that I needed to be redone in the meantime. And then when I decided to change the covers again for the Midnight Chronicles, I asked him to do them. And I've been much happier with the results. And this is actually something that I need to mention here. He used 3D models for those covers. And I was like, ugh, I hate 3D models. They're horrible. But you know what? Readers don't care as much as authors do. They care that those covers elicit an emotional response that matches what's in the book and that draws people to those books. They don't care that it's a 3D cover, 3D person on the cover. And I think that authors, we care more than the readers do generally. And if the book cover is a marketing piece, it's not it's not a masterpiece. And so if it's doing its job and bringing readers in, then it's working, then it's fine. If it's not, then it's not. And like, why break something that's broken? Anyway, so I don't know. My takeaway is give all big decisions at least 24 hours or overnight before you make your choice, because covers, they're expensive. I really wish I'd waited. I really wish I hadn't gone with the very first person to respond. I wish I'd waited until, at least a day until the guy I really wanted to work with answered. And I didn't, if I'd waited, even just 8 hours, I would have been under contract with him instead. And that would have gone a lot better. And waiting 8 hours, I could have gone back to that first designer if he never responded, and then worked with her anyway. And another takeaway, reach out to one designer at a time. I didn't have that luxury though, because of the time crunch. The Shadow Prophet had already been released, and I knew the covers were hurting downloads in the middle of a huge launch. But in general, it's just worth the time to reach out to one person at a time, and to make sure the covers are what you really want before you put a lot of money into something. And honestly, the covers the other designer did were better than the ones that I'd done myself. So maybe it wasn't the end of the world. But with all the health problems my baby was having at the time, and all the money I'd already put into the launch, those $1,200 really hurt.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, and this is something I've grappled with a lot too, is like occasionally I gotta like write it down. There's a person I follow online who had a problem with arguing with fans, and he had a little marble statue that said "Do not engage," and he put it on his desk. And he's like, anytime he feels like answering an email angrily, "Do not engage." I gotta have a thing that just says "Take a breath," because very, very seldom is a career-changing decision the sort of thing you have to make like that. And occasionally, if I have a good idea or I feel that I've made a mistake, I start getting into a tizzy about I gotta do something immediately. And fairly frequently, it could benefit from a couple of just give it a second. It's not going to end the world if you don't do this right now. Make sure it's the right thing. And yeah, like we talk about how being nimble is one of the things that indie authors have above, traditionally published authors. I lost the word for a moment there. But being too nimble means you just go jumping off cliffs, which could be a problem too.
Well, and I had the same kind of experience this year with the covers weren't getting done fast enough. Like I was ready to release and I didn't have the cover yet. So I'm always happiest when I have like the cover weeks ahead of time, but that's a challenge when you write quickly. So sometimes you write more quickly than the artists are able to do the work. So that's another reason, another time when just doing the Photoshop manipulation kind of covers are going to be probably the best way to go, because usually the designers can get those done pretty quickly in compared to like a custom art piece, or even these ones I have are we did a photo shoot, they found models, and then he does the Illustrator background. They're really cool. I don't have any regrets on that place. I just don't know that spending all the extra money was really like resulted in a whole bunch of extra sales. But the time thing, I guess, if you don't give yourself enough time, you're more apt to make decisions that maybe are not the wisest ones. And I still don't quite know what the answer is with covers when you write quickly. Probably the Photoshop manipulation stuff is just easiest. Or getting illustrations that aren't so tied into the story that it's okay if they don't quite match the story you end up writing. Because I've definitely ordered like the spaceship illustrations before, where I'm like, well, there's gonna be a battle at a space station. You just make it look cool. And it's like, it's not exactly how the battle was, but it's close enough. I will say the readers do care. Just to argue with Andrea, the diehard fans are like, yeah, that doesn't look at all like how I imagined the character, but that's just, you have to accept that. I mean, I've been a fan of books for, however many years, where traditionally published stuff where it's not at all like the character. It's like, that's just how it is. Sometimes the job of the cover is just to sell the book. And, if it matches up well, great. If not, oh well. Hopefully it sold books and then people read them anyway. And then it gives them something to discuss in fan forums, how the character's hair was the wrong color.
Yeah, when we had the cover designer on, I don't know if you guys remember, but she was like, the hair color doesn't matter. And I was like, well, my series, it does, because their magic is based on their hair color. And if I get that wrong, that's a huge thing. And not just to readers, but it's just, I would have had really bad backlash, because, it's the hair color was so important. Are you
But
guys?
those are people that already bought the book that care.
Yeah.
The people who are thinking about it aren't checking the sample chapters. Let me check here. Is that actually the hero on the front? I don't think so. I'm not buying this book.
No, and you make a good point, because like diehard fans are going to buy the book anyway, and they're the ones that are going to care the most. And readers who haven't read the book, you know, they're going to go back and go like, wait a second, that was the wrong hair color, you know. But they're probably, if they enjoyed it, they're probably going to continue reading even though the hair color is wrong. Do either of you guys have anything to add before we wrap up?
Nope. I guess we'll get to listener questions in a future episode. We have a few we keep putting off. I thought we were going to go short on this show. I don't know why I always say that. Okay. I'm done. Thanks for listening, everyone. It was good to talk about how much we suck this week.
Yes. And I wasn't even going to mention the listener questions, because I'm like, oh, we've mentioned them every week. We're going to have to get to them next week. We're going to have to get to them this week. We just didn't get to them. But we will do a Q&A episode, you know, just like where it's all Q&As, and because we've got a bunch of those in the Facebook group. Anyway, so yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you to Joshua Pearson for producing the show. You can find the show notes or leave a comment or question at sixfigureauthors.com with the number 6. If you do have questions for us, come to the Facebook group. That is probably the best place to ask the questions. We have a post up where you can ask your specific questions, but you can also ask general group questions or general author questions. And sometimes getting a whole bunch of different answers from people other than us is beneficial. Anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you again, everybody, and we will talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So long, everybody.